Allie Buckman with the Potomac Bead Company, and today I'm going to show you how to make this bracelet, which is an awesome flat herringbone bracelet. So if you're not sure how to do flat herringbone, this is a great video for you. I'm also going to show how to attach a clasp. In a lot of my videos, I do buttons, and this one here I'm actually going to show you how to attach one of the clasps. And this is an elegant elements clasp, much like Clasp Garden clasps as well, which we just got in a lot of them, and they really give a nice kind of finished, polished look to your design here at the end. So I'll teach you how to actually work with the herringbone, add the clasp, add new thread, and really the start to the finish of creating and designing a herringbone bracelet. For this herringbone bracelet, I kind of am going with a fall theme that you'll be seeing us work on today, going with a lot of the new Duracoat Opaque colors that Miyuki has out in the 8.0. If you've never done a herringbone before, 8.0 is a great size to start with, although you can start with others. And for this particular bracelet that you're going to help me make and watch along, I'm using 5 Duracoat Opaque colors, going from the Duracoat Opaque Maroon to the Kumquat to the Banana to the Spanish Olive, and then the Cognac as well. We're going to go from those nice reds, orange, yellows, greens to the brown and finish it off on the edges with some 11.0 seed bead. The 11.0 seed bead that I'm using here, that you're going to watch that design element with, are the Duracoat Galvanized Champagne color of the 11.0s. I love it. It's a nice kind of in-between soft golden color. It was out of stock for a while. It's back in, so I figured I had to use it. In addition to my Elegant Elements clasp, as well as my seed beads, I am going to be using some green wildfire beading thread in 0.006. On my beading thread, we're going to be putting a size 10 English beading needle on that thread, and having handy with you a thread burner or a cord cutter. That's going to make it easy for us to get started, to get that thread off, and then a needle nose pliers that you can use to kind of flatten out the end of your thread, and that way you'll be able to create and start your design. I am working on a bead on it board, or a nice workable surface is what you'll want in order to complete your project. To get started, go ahead and get about 5 feet of beading thread on a size 10 needle and pour out a little bit of your opaque maroon seed beads. That way we'll get ready to get started. So to get started on flat herringbone stitch, the stitch is actually going to start out with doing a square stitch, or a ladder stitch some people will call it, and we're going to do it 2 wide. This lacy herringbone example here has a wider edge than we're going to actually be doing. We're going to do 6 beads across, and then going and doing the ladder stitch with each of those. Because I'm doing that kind of fall fade, I'm going to be using the Duracoat Opaque Maroon at the very start. So I have my needle and thread using the green wildfire thread on the 10 needle, and I've created a stop bead at the end of my thread. However, because I'm going to be adding my fun clasp to the end, I'm actually leaving about 20 inches of thread at the very end to attach my clasp. That way I'm not going to have to tie on an additional thread. So you're going to have a fairly long tail with your stop bead right on the opposite end. To start out, pick up 2 of your 8.0 seed beads and then another 2. Let those all drop down next to your stop bead here. And then we're going to circle back through the first 2 beads that we added. Once you're coming out of those 2 beads, you can see the set of 2 sits right next to one another. So you have your 2 that are right above your stop bead, and then the 2 that are right next to it. What we're going to do is take our needle and thread through our second set of 2, so that way it's coming out right towards the stop bead. Again, we're going to add 2 more seed beads, so I'm adding 2, sewing in a circle. My thread's coming out the bottom of those 2 8.0 seed beads. I add 2 on the needle, and I'm going to sew into the top of those. Pull the thread through, and then take your needle and thread and sew up through the 2 that you just added. Coming out the top now of the 8.0s that you just added, add 2 more 8.0s onto your needle, and sew into the bottom side of those 8 O's. So your thread is circling. After you have that pulled nice and tight, in order to progress, we're going to sew down the last set of 2 that we just added. You can do this any length that you want. Again, I'm going to be doing 3 rows of herringbone. So this is going to be, herringbone is done in groups of 2. So I need 3 groups of 2. So I have 2 groups of 2 right now. I'm going to be adding my second group, or my third group now. The thread goes in on the opposite side after adding 2. Back up through the 2 that you just added. Now we'll add our last ones in place, because again we're doing a group of 3 sets of 2 back into the previous ones you just added. And then we're going to sew down the beads that we just added. At the end of this stitch, your thread should be coming out the same end as your stop bead. Once it's coming out the same end of the stop bead here and you have your 6 rows on, we're going to go ahead and get ready to start in on our herringbone. So to start the herringbone, whenever you're on the side of the beads here, you're going to pick up a 15-0. All that's going to do is actually hide the thread on the side, and you're not going to see any thread then exposed. I'm going to take my needle and thread coming out the very last bead that I added and sew into the second to last bead with the needle going away from the stop bead. That's going to put that 11-0 seed bead right along the side. And again, just decorate a little bit so you don't see a lot of the thread. Coming out the top then, the herringbone is based on groups of 2. We're coming out 1 bead and we add 2 beads to our needle. We're going to sew down the bead beside along the base row, and then once we're sewed down that base bead, we're going to take our needle and thread and go up through the 3rd bead of that row of the 8 O's that's creating the base of the herringbone. Once I'm up through that bead, I'm going to add 2 more beads on, sew down through the 4th bead in that row. So I'm only sewing down through 1 of the beads in those sets of 2. And then I'm going to sew up through the 5th bead. When I'm up through the 5th bead, I want to add on 2 more beads, so 2 more of my 11s, and I'm going to sew through the very outer bead, that 6th bead, and give a nice tight pull. You can see the herringbone stitch. The beads almost sit on an angle or in a V shape as you're working with them. I like to, when I get to the end of the row, flip the project in my hand. So this way the stop bead is actually going to be on my right hand side, because I like to sew from the right to the left. To start my next row of herringbone, I'm going to add an 11-0 seed bead. Sew up through the bead on the very right hand side at the top. Give a nice tight pull, and that's going to have that 11-0 bead just on the side. On go 2 more of my 8-0 seed beads. I'm coming out bead number 1. I'm going to sew down bead number 2 and up bead number 3 from the previous row. Give a nice tight pull and make those beads kind of cooperate and sit the way that you want them to. Add 2 more beads on. We're going to sew down bead 4 and up bead 5. If it confuses you to sew through 2 beads at once, go ahead and just sew down bead 4, have your needle come out the bottom of 4, and then go back up through 5. 2 more beads go on, and I'm going to sew out the side towards bead 6. Again, switching the project in my hand. I'm going to then grab another 11-0 and sew up through that last bead on the edge on the right hand side. I can then go in and add 1 more row of my 8-0s. 2 8-0s go on as I'm coming out the top of bead 1. So down bead 2 and then up bead 3. Once you're coming out of bead 3, 2 more beads go on, down bead 4 and out bead 5. If it does help you can do these with different colors rather than the fade. So that way you can keep your rows in check. I have 2 more beads, and I'm going to sew down bead 6. As I do that, I like to flip my project, and when I'm on the outer edge, to get ready to add my next row, add an 11-0 seed bead and sew up the bead on the very end. And that's going to just place that 11-0 seed bead on the edge. I'm going to continue adding in some more of these 8-0s in the maroon color, and then I'm going to switch over and start to add in some of my Kumquat color too to get ready for that fade. I'm not going to do it exactly even. We're going to kind of fade it from one to another. So when I get ready to do the fade, I'll show you how that occurs. So I'm fading from the red into the orange color to that Kumquat color. And as I fade from the one color to the other, you can see it kind of turned out more of a triangle shape. But really what I just did was started to add in the orange and kind of connect it at some of those points. So added in 1 here, and then as I came back through, added in 2 more and grew from there. And I'll just continue adding in this Kumquat color until I get to my opaque banana. And you can think of that whichever colors and how many colors you have, how long you do each color if you're doing a fade like this is going to be determined by the length of your bracelet. Now, you don't have to do equal amounts of all of them, that's certainly up to you. But if you do want to do about an equal amount, you can just divide the length of your bracelet times the number of colors that you have. So I have 5 colors and I'm doing about a 6 1/4 inch bracelet. I'm going to have a 1/3 of an inch or a 1/2 inch then with my clasp. So that's not going to count in that. So I'm going to do a little bit more than an inch of each color, about 1 1/4 inch of each color, and that's going to get me then the appropriate amount of space, so that way I know that each color is going to be equally represented. So just keep going then with your next color, and then we'll get ready to fade into our opaque banana as we work with it. So now with the banana color in here, I'm going to be transitioning into my green color. So I'm going to get a little bit of that Spanish olive out here. Dump that on my mat here. A couple more of the banana because I used them all. And you can really decide, like I said, where you want to do the fade. The more important thing rather than the fade is that you're actually getting and understanding the herringbone stitch. As you watch and look at the herringbone stitch too, you can see that the 11-0s are going to be on opposite ends and opposite sides. It almost zigzags back and forth where that little 11-0 or that little kind of trim bead is going to be. Just a reminder, as you get to the end of a row, so I'm going to put my opaque Spanish olive on here. As you get to the end of a row, you're always going to pick up the 11-0 seed bead and take the 11-0 seed bead and sew back up through the last bead that you added. When you're coming out the top, you always want to remember that the way that herringbone works is that it's working with 2 beads at a time. So never on your actual herringbone rows will you ever put 1 bead of your 8-0 seed beads. You'll always put an 11. If you did want to do this herringbone stitch in an 11-0 seed bead, then you could run 15-0s down the side, so that way it's going to give you that 15-0, kind of just that little bit of 15-0s. You're always also going to be sewing down through the even bead and up through the odd bead in the previous row if you're counting straight across from 1 to whatever your number doing. In my case here, I'm doing 6. As I do the fades, I do have some rows where I mix the colors and do 1 green, 1 yellow, or 1, in this case, one of those Kumquat, 1 banana. And I'm going back up through them. And I went down bead number 4 and up bead number 5. Coming out the top of bead number 5 here, I'll add in the opposite, one of my banana and one of my green. And I really, as I was working with this, thinking it's more of like an Indian corn look to it. And as you're working, again, you get to the edge. I like to flip over my project because, like I said, I like to sew from right to left. You can keep the project if that confuses you, just from one side, going from one side to the other, but right to left works really well for me, so I switch it. When I get to the other side here, I pick up the Spanish olive, and then the banana. So down bead number 2, and I'm sewing up bead number 3, coming out the top there. When I'm out the top here, I'm going to start transitioning into the full Spanish olive color. And you can make those transitions kind of as long down the sides as you want, or as far in the top. You could keep the banana going for a little bit. That's up to you. Like I said, this is more just making sure that you get that stitch. So I just wanted to have a couple minutes here on camera where you're seeing that stitch again as we get further along in the project. Going ahead and adding the 11-0 on the side, sewing up through the last bead, adding 2 beads on at a time, sewing down bead 2, and then coming out bead 3. Always coming out that odd number bead. I'm going to put on 2 more beads, go down bead 4, and out the odd number, bead 5, out towards the top. When I'm out the top here then, I'm going to go 2 more beads and out bead 6. At that point, I like to flip the project in my hand, put on my 11-0 on the side, or 2 15-0s if you're working with an 8-0, and so back up through the last bead that you added. And then it's just smooth sailing from there, going ahead and adding more of that Spanish olive in place. As you'll notice, the herringbone looks a little bit separated, like the previous row is just kind of hanging out there, until you get ready and add those 2 rows together as you progress along the herringbone. So it's always going to sit in that V right along the side until you're progressing. You can flip that in your hand, and then you're just going to keep going with this design, fading from one color to the other. Since this is a nice learning video that you're learning how to do a stitch, it's also helpful and a good idea if you learn how to tie on extra thread. A lot of stitches use more thread than you may think they're going to use as you kind of progress and get longer and more into them, especially stitches like right angle weave and peyote and even herringbone. So to add more thread, once you get to the point that you really can't work more with it, I like to add more thread towards the middle of the project. I don't like to add thread along the edges of the projects, because when you do that, you actually can see the knots that you're doing. To end it, or to add the more thread, you're going to take the needle and take it off the short piece of thread, and then tie a new knot with the longer piece of thread here that I have around the shorter piece of thread. So you can see the knot there is going around the shorter piece. You can then push that knot up and down along the project. I'm going to push it right down in the middle of one of my herringbone rows. Give a nice tight pull, and then I'm going to tie those 2 thread ends together. So just doing a little square stitch, making sure it's down right next to the project. Do a square stitch right over left and then left over right. I'm going to do that once and then twice. Those thread ends then, take your thread burner, and I'm just using the wildfire cord cutter again. You're just going to burn them down short. You want to keep them on there so you know where they are, especially if you would want to go ahead and glue the end. But this way, it's going to be, the knot is going to be hidden. It's also really convenient that it's while I'm using this Spanish olive color that I need more thread, because it's going to be really hidden inside the green part of the bracelet. Then with the end of my thread, I'm just going to take my needle nose pliers and kind of flatten that out a little bit. Go ahead and get my needle back on then, going through that little flattened end of my thread, and then we'll continue on with the stitch. Once you're at the end of the design, so I have my length here, and you can see my nice kind of Indian corn look that it is, I'm going to go up through my bead like I was getting ready to start another row. But really what I'm going to get ready to do is attach these ends here that kind of are fanned apart without adding any beads, much in that same ladder stitch portion like we did at the start. So I'm going to go down through the 2 beads next to the bead that I'm coming out of. So I'm going down 2 rows. I'm then going to switch over to the 3rd row of seed beads, which would be my first bead in my 2nd row of herringbone. So up there, and once I'm out there, I'm going to circle back to row 2 and go through those again. What that's going to do is bring those 2 ends together and get those nice and tight. Go back up row 4, so we're just doing that ladder stitch again, then down row 5. because rows 4 and 5 are already joined together, I'm gonna, or I'm sorry, 3 and 4 are already joined together. I'm gonna jump over here from 4 to 5 and go around over the top from 4 or from 5 down to 4 and down to the middle here. That will close off the end so that it looks like the beginning end, just with that herringbone look, and start with that ladder stitch that got us going, and then the ladder stitch that is finishing off and holding together. I'm now going to get ready to add on my clasp. So I have the clasp that I'm going to get ready to add on to and get ready to have the actual ends put on, so that way you can wear your bracelet. And we'll go over how to do the ends and how to put on different types in this particular clasp. Once you're at the end of the design and have done the ladder stitch, we're going to get ready to add on our clasp here, so that Elegant Elements Clasp Garden Clasp. I do have some my wire guards handy. If you do want to use the wire guards, basically the wire guards are going to sit inside those loops. So they're nice and tight if you do want to use them. I'm going to just go right in from my thread and connect to my clasp. Because my project is only one-sided, or doesn't matter, it's two-sided, it's not going to matter which side you go onto for the clasp. So I want to attach the clasp in between the rows of the actual herringbone stitch, right along in the middle. To do so, I'm going to stitch over. So I'm coming out right along the middle there, and I'm in the middle of, or the start of the second row rather. When I'm coming out the end, I'm going to add one of my 11-0 seed beads. And from that 11-0 seed bead then, I'm going to stitch through the middle of the clasp, then come back through that seed bead and down through the second side of that same herringbone stitch. On the opposite end, we're going to do the same thing. And I'm going to continue now over to the starting side. Go through here. Get it nice and tight so you don't see a lot of thread exposed. Add one seed bead. And then sew through the clasp. And I like to go from the back to the front. Whichever side you go to, it's nice to continue to that side. It's just going to sit nicer on the project for you. Go through the back end, out the front, then back down through that seed bead and out the outer 2 beads down to the base. I'm going to go back then and reinforce that clasp, going back through the 2, out through the seed bead, through the clasp, and back down through the seed bead. Once I'm there, I'm going to stitch back through the project a little bit, so that way the thread is going to be coming out towards the middle. And I'm just going to stitch back one more row so you don't see a lot of extra thread there. Stitch back and forth here. And I'm going to do the same thing, basically sewing on. It's like sewing a button whenever you add your clasp on. And I'm going to sew up through the end here. Going to reinforce this clasp on this side, right there in the middle, and then I'll jump over and do the one on the end as well one more time. Down through that opposite side, because I wanted to sit it nice and centered. And then I'll sew up through the 2, down here, and then up on the end. When I'm coming out the end 2 beads, I'll go ahead and do my seed bead here, go up through the back of the stitch. Make sure your thread doesn't get twisted there. And come down through that seed bead, going into the second row. Once I'm through that second row then, we're just going to come back up through the first and reinforce. When I get to the opposite end then, I'm just going to do the exact same thing, adding in the seed beads and sitting them right on top, going through the seed beads, through the clasp, back through the seed bead, and then once you're done and you've gotten your threads going through, we're just going to tie off the thread with sewer's knots. You're going to pick up a bridge thread here, stitch below the bridge thread, create a loop, sew through the loop, and that's going to create a little sewer's knot. Pick somewhere else right along the project then, and do the same thing. I usually like to do about 2 or 3 sewer's knots before I'm actually going to finish off my thread. Also, I have my thread zap or my thread burner handy, so that way when I am done, I can burn those threads down right after one of the knots. So I have my 2 knots here. I'll take my thread burner and simply burn that thread down and off. And then once it's burnt off, I'll just take it right from the blunt end and burn it down a little bit further. That end is now finished, and I just have to go back to the starting side, put my needle on the other side, and I'm going to attach the clasp in the exact same fashion. Once the clasp is done and attached, then you're actually finished your project and you can wear your fun little harvest herringbone, flat herringbone bracelet. Once you've got the end of your bracelet all put on, I went back and stitched the other side. You can see how much these clasps really add to the design and kind of make it have that nice professional look to it. I turned it so that way the clasp was on the underside of these thread ends. And I'm just going to go ahead and burn down those thread ends, creating a little knot so or little balls at the end of the thread so the knot will not come apart. And then my bracelet is actually finished. I didn't bother to glue, I just did that sewing back. You can see the nice look of the flat herringbone. It goes faster than you may think, and the designs end up really nice. I love everything that I've seen with the herringbone. It's actually one of my favorite stitch. Again, if you need any of these supplies, either the Easy Elegant or the Elegant Elements clasps, need any of those fun new Duracoat opaques, you can go back to the beginning of the video where we have the little drop-down menu and click from there to order from us online, or to take it to your local Potomac Bead Company and order any materials that you might need to do your flat herringbone bracelet. You can also use a regular clasp, just a button. You would come out the center if you wanted to do one, or you could do 2 buttons and 2 loops on the end. A majority of my other bracelets I use buttons, so you can kind of look at any of those and it'll give you a heads up as far as how to do that. So hopefully you guys enjoyed learning the flat herringbone stitch. If you have not checked it out yet or have not learned it yet, herringbone is a really great versatile stitch that you can learn rather quickly, and it moves quickly also, but gives a nice feel to it when it's actually laying on your wrist. Again, if you need any of the materials, you can go back to the beginning of the video. You can also go underneath here to the little description box. There's a little show more button. Click on that, and that's going to get you a chance to see all the materials that were used in this fun bracelet as well. As always, you can subscribe to this YouTube channel to get regular updates on products like the Duracoat opaques, or actually design ideas as well as techniques and tips, and really just to stay connected with us. You can also stay connected with us by joining our Facebook group for jewelry or for beading and jewelry making. Interact with other beaders there. It's a great opportunity to get to know people, see what people are working on, see what's popular, answer questions, and help other people out as well. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. And if you don't know herringbone, hopefully you do now, and you've enjoyed watching this kind of fall bracelet transform from one color to the other while learning your herringbone stitch.